Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of the Sanam S4 Knowledge Sharing Series webinar. My name is Divya Sahani, and I am the Stakeholder Relations Manager, India at Sanam S4. This series is an endeavor to provide a platform to our Sanam S4 education team members to share their own take on upcoming trends and topics in the wider sector. Over the last 3 decades, India has made significant strides to ensure access to school education for all children and has enrolled over 95% of all 6-year-olds in schools. But quality and equity have remained elusive. Today's webinar will explore the current state of the schooling system in India and help develop an understanding of the challenges for reform. Our lead speaker today is Parth Sarwate, Principal Advisor for the University of Southern California. Parth manages USC's partnerships in India, including building relationships with governments, local institutions, school, and alumni associations. Parth has been working in the education and development sector over the last 17 years and previously was the group head of CSR at RPG Foundation. He has a deep interest in educational reform, people development, and social change. In his previous assignments, Parth has worked with some of India's most respected social sector organizations like Azim Premji Foundation, Shiv Nadar University, Quest Alliance, Indus Trust, and Ford Foundation. He has worked extensively towards leading education change at scale, including a project aimed at reforming around 1,000 government schools in Bihar. Parth currently lives and works in Mumbai, and we're absolutely thrilled to have him on board for the webinar today. Before I hand it off to him, I would like to quickly go over some housekeeping rules. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send across the clip of the webinar as well as the slides to all those that have registered. All attendees will be on mute during the duration of the webinar. However, we will have a Q&A session at the end of Parth's presentation. We request you to kindly send your questions and share your comments in the question chat pod below. With that, over to you, Parth. Really looking forward to an extremely informative session today.
Thank you, Divya. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. So thank you, Divya, for the introduction. Good evening, friends, and thank you for tuning in today to listen to this knowledge sharing webinar on school education in India and challenges for sector reform. I have been very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with some of the most passionate and purposeful organizations and people in the last 15 plus years. It was very exciting to work on school education reform at scale. It is very difficult, believe me, to change one school and to develop it into an excellent institution. It is therefore very much more difficult, if not near impossible, to work for reform at scale. The school sector in India is a large ecosystem that has been difficult to change, but has seen some amazing efforts in the last 3 decades. But before I delve into the challenge for school education reform in India, I'll take a few minutes talking about the history of schooling in India. That will help us set the context in which we can understand some of today's policy debates. Historically, uh, we can talk about 4 phases of school education or school system reform change in India. The first stage can be called the Indigenous education system in India that existed before the advent of the East India Company. Many British administrators at that point of time, from 1830 to 1882, wrote about this system. Education then in India was carried out through a system of pathshalas, madrasas, gurukuls. In 1830, William Adam wrote in a report that there existed about 100,000 village schools in Bengal and Bihar at that time. Similarly, other British administrators from the Bombay Presidency, the Madras Presidency, and Punjab also noted that there were village schools in every village in their region. During this time, in the early 1800s, British administrators in India were divided into 2 distinct camps. One were called Orientalists, who supported the study of local languages like Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit. The other camp, which is called the Anglicists, were led by Lord Macaulay, who famously argued in his report called the Macaulay Minute that the East India Company must do their best to develop a class of Indians who would be interpreters between them and the millions that they governed. He said that they would be Indian in blood and in color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in words, and intellect. He also recommended the stopping of the Sanskrit College in Kolkata and the closing of madrasas and stopping the printing of Arabic and Sanskrit textbooks. This led to the first reform of education in India as he adopted an English curriculum and the modern factory schooling system, with teachers who were seen as translators and delivery agents, supported by an eager Inspector Raj. This initially meant a revamp of the earlier teachers. The Maulvis, the Gurus, who had complete autonomy and traditional knowledge, were now out of the system. They were now replaced by teachers who were not well versed in an English system and were very poorly educated to teach the new subjects of English, maths, and sciences. In 1931, Mahatma Gandhi, about 100 years later, speaking at Chatham House in London, called this out and spoke of how in 100 odd years the beautiful tree of Indian education was systematically uprooted and left to die, and that it had perished. He stated that the village schools were not good enough for the British administrator, so he came out with this program. Every school must have so much paraphernalia, building, and so forth. And you'll see this as we talk about it later. This is a recurring theme in Indian education. Uh, so he said every school must have so much paraphernalia, buildings, so forth. This very poor country of mine is ill able to sustain such an expensive method of education. Gandhi then, in his new Talim or basic education scheme, suggested a way to revive the old village schools and rebuild a system with a base around skilling, working with hands, performing manual labor, and developing a Swadeshi system. However, as India marched towards independence and a nationalistic movement was going on at that point of time, which was also led by Nehru's vision of an industrialist society. We repurposed the system then with recommendations from educationists like S. Radhakrishnan, Abul Kalam Azad, Sri Aurobindo, and social reformers like Phule and Ambedkar to pursue the development of scientific temper to the learning of sciences, English, and maths. The Constitution of India also played a major role, shaped by Ambedkar's vision of providing a larger purpose, recommending equity by imploring the nation to guarantee an education for all and the pursuit of certain ideals as enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Now, you will see that some of these ideas are true even today, and the Right to Education Act passed in 2009 really was to ensure that Ambedkar's idea of making sure that everybody got an education came true. This gave so post independence, this gave rise to an idealistic system that did not have a robust foundation and ended up being a muddled approach, where we expected schools to develop the ideal citizen, but where the system was not backed up by an equivalent funding support. The next major push for reform was seen in 1966 to 1968. And there's an error here. It says Kothari Commission 1986. It's actually Kothari Commission 1968. With the setting up of the Kothari Commission. The Kothari Commission was was very pioneering and suggested a radical reconstruction of the education system. And you'll all probably know that we currently have a 10 plus 2 plus 3 formula, which was accepted in 1968. And it codified that throughout the country, we will have a basic 10 years of schooling plus 2 years of 11th and 12th, and then 3 years of college. Science and technology were given a deeper push as science and mathematics were made compulsory for the first time up to grade 10th. The Kothari Commission also talked about incorporating moral education and actually connecting the education to the life of the people. So it was a very very interesting report. For the first time, a report talked about management of the education system in India and a revamp of the teacher education system was also suggested. These ideas were at that point of time very new and were later reinforced by later policy statements in the National Policy of Education 1986, which reintroduced a push towards vocational education, which then, which by then had lost its value completely. Young people were all ready to be schooled in modern schooling system to become responsible citizens, but were not ready to work with their hands in the fields or learn other vocational skills. The NP 1986 reignited and developed a push to redevelop vocational skilling systems 50 years after they had been suggested by Gandhiji. In 1986-87, another significant movement on reform process began in India under the Rajiv Gandhi government, uh, called the Operation Blackboard. Recognizing the education for all movement across the world, India began a process of increasing investment in infrastructure to push for a promise suggested in the Indian Constitution to ensure each child across our country has had an opportunity to complete at least a basic education. Under Operation Blackboard, the government defined the idea of a school infrastructure and allocated funds to improve schools and build new schools. Within a short period of time, India had set up an amazing number of schools, eventually ensuring that 97% of habitations in India had a basic school up to grade 5 within 1 kilometer range. This was the biggest push needed to ensure that all children were brought into the ambit of schools. This was then followed up by the World Bank in 1990, which initiated a partnership project with the government of India called the District Primary Education Program. This ensured increased teacher development infrastructure systems and education management systems were developed. This was initially done as a pilot project, but then slowly expanded across the country. As the World Bank project sort of winded up, uh, the government actually set up the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, a semi-government body to manage these reforms and take these reforms further. This was the phase where Indian education system expanded, but along with the rapid expansion came a lot of new challenges and constraints. Let us take a pause here and change our perspective and pivot from the historical context to the international education reform context. The international education reform context also sort of had a similar journey that began formally in 1990 with the first Education for All conference in Jomtien in Thailand. And many of the world's multilateral agencies came together for the first time. This included UNICEF, UNESCO, World Bank, and many governments, almost all governments of came together, and they set up goals for the first time for education systems. And the first goal that was acknowledged by all of the governments was education for all, making sure that everybody got a universal access to education. Over the years, this goal kept progressively shifting and and was made more and more specific and more broader. And today we know it as the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is to ensure inclusive and quality education for all and promote lifelong learning. Now, if you look at these words, these are very critical to how we understand education today. We must make sure that we do not just provide education for everybody in our country and in the world, but make sure that it is inclusive. It brings in all children of the world and it provides a quality education. Just a simple education is not good enough. It must provide everybody a quality education and also promote lifelong learning. These are today's new ideals. So if we look at this, uh, from this we actually get three progressive broad goals for the Indian education system, and these have been recognized by various policy documents in India. These three goals are: the first one, as we already talked about, is the education for all, which we also call access. The second progressive goal is we expand it a little bit and now call it quality education for all. This is to make sure that we ensure that every child gets a quality education. The third goal, we expand it even further and we say it is to provide an equal opportunity for all through quality education, and ensure that everyone gets it. This is the goal of equity. Now, this is the next question in our mind, probably at this stage is, so where does India stand on the achievement of these goals? But before we can answer that question, I'm going to quickly talk about the current structure of schooling in India. While discussing the Kothari Commission, I mentioned that by 1968, the country had adopted the 10 plus 2 plus 3 model. The first 12 years of schooling in this model were defined in this way. I'm sure many of you know this, but I'm just going to quickly show it for those who are not aware or understand the Indian education system. It basically has 3 years of preschool education, 5 years of primary education, followed by 3 years of secondary education, 2 years of ninth and 10th, which is called the higher secondary education, followed by a 10th board exam by various boards. And I've listed some of the boards here. At this point of time, you can either go into a polytechnic or go into grade 11 and 12, where you continue in the mainstream education, followed by which we have a 12th board exam, which again is held by various boards, followed by which is followed by going into an university to get your undergraduate bachelor's degree. This bachelor's degree is typically of 3 years, but for other professional courses, it could be 4 years or 5.5 years, followed by which you can also again lead towards the PG diploma, uh, which is another 2 years of education. So this is briefly the education structure. I'm going to also take another minute to talk about school types in India. So we have uh, government schools, which are largely run by the state government. We also have central government schools, and this includes schools like the uh, Kendriya Vidyalaya, the central schools, the Navodaya schools, the Kasturba Gandhi schools for girls, private unaided schools. These are schools which are run privately by various people across the country, and we'll talk about this further in this discussion. And then there are private aided schools. The aided schools are schools that are privately run but are aided by the government. We also have minority schools, which are minority institutions. These are special schools set up under a separate act that allows minorities to run their schools in order to preserve their status. Then we have alternate schools, which actually run on a philosophy and try to build alternative systems. And then we have NGO run schools. So it's a broad mix of different institutions. I wanted to make a note here that we have to understand that all schools in India are actually not for profit institutions. We are not allowed in India to have schools that are for profit, though as we go along, we will talk about it in one of the debates that whether we can really have for profit institutions in India. Now, let's go to the three broad progressive goals that we talked about of access, quality, and equity. Uh, how does India really fare on these three? As we've already talked on access, India has done a great job, and the Rajiv Gandhi government made sure that we reached out to all children in all habitats across India. So let's quickly do a poll here, and the poll is going to be to ask all of you to guess how many schools are there in India. So, can Joyce help me and run this poll? Thank you. Okay, great. We are getting some responses. Okay, fantastic. We have about half the people who voted, and probably many of you are still thinking about the answers. Okay, we have a few more people. Maybe it's a difficult question, but to understand scale, I thought this is the first question that we must tackle, because otherwise we are not able to really understand the challenge of scale in India. Okay, fantastic. We have, I think, 66% of people who voted now. So a few more people, we're still waiting for their responses. Okay, we've now run this poll for a minute. So Joyce, can you actually share the poll results? We'll stop here. Okay, fantastic. So this is amazing. A lot of you seem to have got it right, and 38% of you say that it's 1.5 million, 21% think it's 1 million, and 25% think it's 2 million. And interestingly, we are, a lot of you are close. I think the largest majority has got this right. And we'll stop sharing the poll and get back to the presentation. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Okay, fantastic. So yes, 38% of you got it right. We have 1.52 million schools. This is as per 2018, of which 73% are government schools. So if you can see that 1.1 million schools are run by governments in India. These are run by the state governments and the central governments together. Each state in India runs anywhere between 100,000, from 10,000 schools to over 100,000 schools. The bigger states run about 100,000 schools. So you can understand, as I was mentioning earlier, it is difficult to change one school. Imagine now that you have to work on changing 100,000 schools or 10,000 schools in a state. So it's a very big challenge. Private schools are about 0.33 million, and we will talk about these private schools as we go along. So how many children study in these schools? If you look at this figure now, the total number of children estimated in 2017 in India in the age group of 6 to 17, which is the school going age, were 294 million. Of them, in 2018, we had 260 million children enrolled in various schools, and of these, 135 million were boys, 125 million were girls. So, how if we were to talk about the reach, what kind of reach do these schools, what kind of reach do these schools really have? You'll be surprised to know that 97% of habitations in India, and a habitation is defined as a uh, small habitation. A habitation is smaller than a village. Usually, any population of 500 people living in an area is called an habitation. And within 1 kilometer range, of this habitation, there is a school in 97% of the habitations across the country. So this is absolutely fantastic, and we have seen that. This basically means that every child in India, almost everywhere, has access to a school. And this is the reason why India has pushed and ensured that over 95% of children at the age 6 are enrolled in a school. So overall, we are doing fantastic and fairly well on the access. How are we, uh, another statistic that is very important to know, that many of these schools, 4 out of 10 schools, have less than 60% children enrolled, 60 children enrolled totally, which means most of the schools are very small schools because they are catering to small habitations. How does India really fare on quality? So before we sort of go into the statistics in this, let me say that as educators, we all know that we as a country face a deep learning crisis. Uh, this crisis is, before I sort of share the statistics, maybe I should give a warning to brace yourself. These are very, very stark, statistics, and the reality is very, very dark. Uh, let's take the first one. 33% of children in grade 5 in India cannot read and write. I think this figure will tell you about the challenges of scale. This is a huge challenge that we face, that in by the time children get to grade 5, and we have no detention policy in India, that means all children, whether they are learning or not, are promoted to the next grade till grade 5. And therefore we have this unique situation that about 33% of children in India in grade 5 are unable to read or write. What further accentuates or increases this crisis is that there's another 33% of children who can read but do not understand what they're reading. The crisis continues. About half the children in grade 5 can barely read grade 2 text. If we go to mathematics, the report card isn't great either. And these two statements will tell you that just about 20, less than 20% of the children, or 25% of children can do age appropriate mathematics in their particular class. If we continue to talk about other statistics, there's another interesting one which I continue to talk about. From 2004 to 2009, I was part of a program called the Learning Guarantee Program, run in about 15,000 schools across 4 states by the Azim Premji Foundation. We did competency assessments for children in primary schools and awarded schools that guaranteed that at least 70% of the children learned 70% of the competencies. What we realized through this program was that there were less than 10% of the schools where children were learning as per expectations. Only 10% of the schools or less were guaranteeing that all children learned the skills that they're supposed to learn in grade 1 to 5. The next statistic is also one which is very worrying. Because children do not learn as per expectations, only 50 to 55% children reach grade 8. And again, this is very shocking that we have a very large dropout as children keep dropping out of school and do not reach grade 8. This continues further, and only 30 to 40% of children reach grade 10, of which only 40% to 50% pass nationally, which basically means that only about 10 to 15% children reach grade 11 and 12. So, of a cohort of 100 children who join grade 1, and we know that all of them join grade 1, by the time we get to grade 11 and 12, there are only 10 to 15 children left in that cohort. The others have already dropped out. So, this is the kind of deep learning crisis that we face. Now, let's talk about how does India fare on equity. And uh, the first, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the statistics that are here, but I've just taken literacy levels in India. And if you look at the Census of India figures, you'll realize that the gender gap is huge. Across urban, rural areas, we have a huge gender gap, with women being less literate than males. If you look at the urban rural gap, also, we have a huge gap. And you'll see that literacy in urban areas is much more than in rural areas. And this kind of a gap uh, continues whether we talk about, if we were to talk about the gender gap, we have seen across the country that girls are more likely to be enrolled in a government school, uh, and the boys are enrolled in private schools where the parent can afford it. So the boys are picked and sent to a private school because they are expected to be the earners, and therefore they need to study better. We also know that with disabilities, this gets even worse. Three-fourths of the children with disabilities at age 5 are not enrolled in any school, in a pre-primary school. One-fourth of the children with disabilities are not enrolled in any school, even after, uh, even as they are older, they're not enrolled in any school. And this gap keeps growing with every successive year. And then, if we overlay the idea of caste and gender, then we'll see that lesser girls with disabilities, or if there are different castes and they have disabilities, the complex, the discrimination becomes even more. This sort of continues. We can talk about other gaps like toilets not being available in school, castes not being allowed, and so on. But I think we'll just stop here because uh, I don't want to just paint a dark picture. There are good things also that happen in Indian education. And now we'll shift our focus towards the policy issues in India. So I'm going to talk about 5 policy debates in India. There are many that we could have talked about, but I've picked 5 that I think are very relevant, and we'll only talk about these 5. The first is teacher development. The second is assessment reforms. Third is the changing role of EdTech, and I'm sure a lot of you are interested in this. The fourth is language of instruction, and the fifth is allowing private schools to grow, and or do we promote the public system. So these are the 5 debates that we're going to talk about. Let's first talk about people development. Now, if we talk about the teacher, who is it? You know, a big good question about about teacher development in India is, who wants to be a teacher? Would you want to be a teacher? And if you want to be a teacher, what kind of pre-service preparation do you really get? Do you get enough preparation to be able to teach? So this is a big question. Also, salaries are such that you can ask this question, that who wants to be a teacher? But fortunately, in India, government jobs are still very much wanted, and therefore a lot of people still do want to be a teacher, but they get very poor pre-service preparation. The second question is, do teachers get adequate support and training? Because unless we ask this question, there's this issue of in-service training, and our teachers in India, do they get adequate support while they're on the job? The next question that I want to ask is, what opportunities exist for career advancement for the teacher? Can they become administrators? Once they become administrators, do they get really any kind of advantage? Do they get any kind of training to become an administrator, or are they just put on the job because they're senior teachers? These are some of the questions that we ask. I think another very relevant uh, statement that we've heard from many teachers is this, that I am at the bottom of the education pyramid. Though the teacher is the one who has complete autonomy inside the classroom, a lot of teachers feel that they are at the bottom of the education pyramid, and neither can they change curriculum nor can they make choices. They have to do whatever their seniors ask them to do, and we have a complex hierarchical system where the block education officer, the higher authorities in government actually dictate what the teacher is supposed to do, in the whether it's in the government or in a private school. The next question actually is very relevant for teacher autonomy and for teacher accountability. That is the teacher alone responsible for all these learning outcomes? You've seen that the teacher, you know, you've seen that the learning statistics for India, and the question that we want to ask is the teacher alone responsible for learning outcomes? So these are some of the key questions or the policy debates in India around teacher development. I'm going to continue and take questions in a little while, but let me talk about all the 5 key reform areas. The next reform area that we want to talk about is assessment systems. The first uh, key challenge in India is that we use assessment to really look at whether children are learning or not learning. So this is what we call assessment of learning. Are children learning? The key is to establish achievement of learning outcomes. This is what leads to high stakes examination to determine merit and competition for scarce seats. And I think a lot of you already know the challenges that this leads to. This is because we have summative exams. We don't do examinations throughout the year as children are taught a particular topic, but we do them at the end of the year, and this creates its own challenges. This then encourages rote memorization, because you have to memorize a whole year's worth of information and regurgitate it on the answer paper. This has led to a deep mental health crisis, and we find that there is a difficulty to design tests, therefore, for higher order skills like application, analysis, and synthesis. The alternative for this is to develop uh, an assessment for learning. Can we actually use assessment to improve learning? The This has various issues or policy debates. One is that assessment for learning really aids students to identify opportunities to continue learning. It allows us to develop low stakes continuous formative assessment system, so the teacher can actually use assessment to understand whether children are learning or not learning, and therefore change her learning style, ensure that she reaches out to the children who are not learning in school, and make sure that they are able to catch up. This is something that doesn't happen today in our classrooms. This still assessment for learning encourages testing of higher order skills, because we are not only asking questions like have you understood or can you repeat, but helps teachers to ask children to do analysis, to apply, to do synthesis of issues. However, this is not very useful for establishing merit and does not aid or help entrance into higher education levels. So this is one challenge that we face with assessment for learning, but it does allow students to enjoy the process of assessment And therefore, if you see in sports, for example, even if you fail, let's say you are doing you're playing cricket or you're playing football, even if you haven't scored a goal, even if you have got out, you want to go out and play again. This is where formative assessment really helps, because children see it as a challenge and they enjoy taking tests, because this is to help them improve their learning. Now let's go to the next reform area, and I'm not going to give any recommendations at this point of time, but let's talk about the next reform area, which is EdTech. And I'm sure this is a very hot topic today. And as soon as we talk about EdTech, what education experts in India, especially working in public education, see is this: oh, the new genie. Whether EdTech really can live up to its image and give us all the advantages that it's supposed to give us, is today not very clear. What are the what are the benefits of this new paradigm? EdTech is very intuitive and therefore allows adaptive learning, but we must see it as a tool to support the teacher, and it does give you open access to a lot of resources. But there are a lot of disadvantages also. There have been concerns whether learning outcomes are achieved. High screen time is a very big challenge that we see. Lack of human touch is another one, because without the teacher, can we really teach soft skills, 21st century skills, the ability to be good citizens, the ability to care for each other? Can we teach these skills if we only adapt the EdTech genie? Uh, it Also another big question is subjective assessment. So if you're going to ask long questions, which require you to think out of the box, imagine ideas, can EdTech really assess this kind of an assessment? And then we have issues of safety in an online environment as well. But EdTech doesn't have to be online, but I think we are moving towards it. That's why I wanted to raise this issue. For example, let's look at this picture. This is a robo teacher at Indus International School in Bangalore, and I'm not going to go into too much of my experience of being working in this school where we also had a robo teacher. But I must assure all of you that the robo teacher was only to answer questions that children could ask, which are already available on Google. There was also a person or a real teacher available in each classroom who would help children to think about perspective. So, what's the verdict? And the verdict, according to me, is that EdTech is still a very nascent tool in education. It needs more development. It must be used in conjunction with teachers and educationists, and not, uh, you know, purely as a way to get to quick monetization of the current tech tools. And that quick monetization has also given EdTech a bad name. It needs more research and more collaborative efforts. So this is my verdict on how the EdTech debate in India is really going. Let's go to the fourth reform area, which is language of instructions. And this is a very, very hot topic, but also a very, very controversial one. And this is how I see it. So it's like a seesaw. And with our entire country today voting with their feet for a private education, because what they really want is an English education, which is very highly desirable. It has a great connect to the job market. Though what we also see is there's a teacher shortage and lack of capability. In rural areas, neither are English resources available, nor can uh, really teachers speak the language, and therefore there are not enough teachers. And first generation learners have a big problem, because it is difficult for first generation learners to really practice speaking, and therefore they are not really able to get advantages uh, of learning the language. Then on the other hand, on the other side of the seesaw, we have the mother tongue. This is, of course, mother tongue education is a political issue, and therefore it's always on the seesaw. You see ups and downs in both sides. It's also backed up by education research that it helps younger and first generation learners learn better. However, we also realize that there are not enough books and resources available, especially in science and maths, which at the higher levels is only taught in English. This is another big challenge. So this is, I don't have a verdict in this one because this is still a very challenging issue. And I really understand both sides of the picture, that we need English education, but we also need mother tongue at younger ages, especially in rural areas where children find it difficult to continue in the classroom in a foreign language that they don't understand, and nobody in their village can either speak. Let's go to the last area. This is the
Parth,
last.
next slide.
Yes.
Just a quick count check. We are at 45
Yeah,
minutes.
I'll finish in 5 minutes. So quick, I'm going to quickly go over the last area. Again, a very big debate in India is, should we support private education or should we support public education? Very interestingly, yesterday, the biggest report on private schooling in India was released by Central Square Foundation Omidyar Network. And it said that today, 46% of children study in a private school. So across India, children are choosing and parents are choosing to send their child in private school. What was also very, very surprising was that 70% of these private schools charge less than 1,000 rupees a month, and 45% of them charge less than 500 rupees a month. Now, this will surprise you because a lot of times our perception is that private schools are elite schools, but it's not really that way. A lot of children from the poor middle class are also choosing to go to private schools. Why? Because the perception of government schools is that they are not very good quality. Parents are willing to spend a huge amount of their money to send children to private schools today. The belief is that private schools provide better learning outcomes, and this can be definitely be challenged. Uh, they provide English medium education, and government schools are either too far or very poor quality. These are the beliefs because of which a lot of people choose to send their child to a private school. We also know for sure that teachers in private schools are paid much lesser, are lesser trained, and are less competent. However, because there is a time and task is better, a lot of private schools do supposedly provide better learning outcomes. But the reality is that when outside agencies came and tested these schools, learning outcomes were not necessarily better, and it showed that both private and public schools need reforms. Uh, uh, just a last note on this, that there are voucher systems where the government pays for children to go to private schools. This today needs a lot more research and implementation efficiency before we can adopt voucher systems. But definitely it has some potential. Now I'll come to the end of my discussion. I've just noted here the key stakeholders in India, in the government sector, multilateral agencies working in education reform, academic institutions. This is for any of you who want to reach out to these organizations to do research or to support research in India. I've also listed some of the leading NGOs in India working in this sector and CSR efforts. I won't go into all of these. This is just for people who are looking to enter India or work with organizations in India or make a difference. The last slide for today, my conclusions. So India has a large and complex evolving education sector and has multiple stakeholders. And we need a lot of research and partnerships for change. And it's not very easy to make change happen. I think we have to understand the two, three key pieces which I spoke about. One is people development. We need more passionate participants to enter the area. I think EdTech has great potential, but if they enter the market only for monetization, it will not be worth their trouble, because a lot of EdTech companies in India have also failed in the last few years. And the last line that I want to really say, that school reform in India or anywhere is a long-term, continuous, progressive process. And in the words of a famous authors from Stanford who wrote a book, school education is like tinkering towards utopia. It doesn't happen really fast. It is all reform process is like we are tinkering slowly towards making a big difference. So that's what I want to say, and welcome all of you to participate in this process if you can. Work with an NGO, try to make a difference, try to understand what challenges India faces as a large country, to make education, education be meaningful for all its children. So thank you very much. And This is my email if any of you want to reach me, and I'm happy to take questions. We'll give you some time, and I also need a little break after speaking for the last 45 minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Parth. Everybody, you can type in your questions in the question chat box. That should be on your screens on the right-hand side. And we'll give Parth a few minutes to recuperate after that very informative presentation.
Let me also see if I can stop my sharing.
I think you have. We can't see your deck anymore.
Okay. Excellent.
So Parth, I've also kind of tuned into your session, and I've learned some of the really fascinating data points and statistics that you've mentioned. Very interesting to hear that the state of the sector report came out yesterday by Central Square Foundation and Umadiyar Network. Perhaps it would be interesting to kind of hear what, according to you, were some other glaring kind of statistics that you saw in that. I mean, the fact that 46% of India's students are studying in private schools is, I mean, one won't think that. What are your thoughts on the report?
See, this has been a trend that we've seen in the last, maybe 20 years, because I think that there are two, three key things. One is I think governments never woke up and did not realize that English is so much in demand, and I think we have now seen a number of states, especially like Haryana, Andhra Pradesh, which have pivoted, and they are now ensuring that even government schools not only teach English from grade one, but the medium of instruction is also English for all other subjects. This is really, improved uh, government schools in the states that have done this, and a number of children are now feel better to go into government schools. But I think the reality is very much on the wall, and private schools have not been treated very well. They've been left alone as if they were only serving the elite. But what we've forgotten is that in Indian psyche, education has a very important role. And though we have a very poor quality education system, a lot of young people, a lot of working class today wants their children to study in private schools, and so they are voting to send their children to private schools even at great cost, and they're basically ensuring that social change really happens in their families by sending the child off to a private school, and they hope that the child will learn and be able to get a job which will bring in more earning. So I think it's this belief that drives all of this. But on the learning outcome front, we have also seen that private schools are not necessarily better, and it's very difficult for parents to know, does their private school really give a better education than the government school? And I think this is what a lot of people on the debate yesterday were talking about, that we need an independent regulator who can help parents decide on private schools, something which is a big challenge.
Fascinating. Parth, while you were speaking, we've had a stream of questions come in. I'll probably address the first one, which was an inquiry as to where these 500 to 1,000 rupees per month fee schools exist in Tamil Nadu. I guess that was discovered in the report.
Okay.
Um,
Well, actually, yeah, go ahead, Divya.
no, please go ahead.
No, I think see, these schools are everywhere. I think we miss these schools because a lot of us don't actually look out for these schools. And I don't know in Tamil Nadu specifically, because I haven't visited Tamil Nadu a lot, but I've visited Andhra Pradesh. I visited Karnataka. I've traveled a lot, and I can say with a lot of conviction, these schools are everywhere. Uh, a lot of these schools actually started in Hyderabad, in the slums, in communities where the a lot of the population was not very happy sending their children to government schools. where communities came together to said, okay, the demand is that anyway I have to send my son or daughter to tuitions. So why not actually start a school which will actually help all these children learn, and slowly, we started seeing mushrooming of these schools. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember these schools initially faced a lot of challenges because they were not supported by big names. The block education officers used to harass some of the school owners and make sure that they found it difficult to continue. But over a period of time, this system grew because a lot of the poor, and I'll also speak about, let's look at the people who work as office boys or as maids or as drivers. Ask them, a lot of the people who live in cities, ask them where do they send their children to study, and you'll be surprised to hear that they'll be sending them to these schools which charge less than 500 rupees a month or less than 1000 rupees a month. And actually a lot of young entrepreneurs have actually figured out how to still make profits even though it's a not-for-profit institution, how to make surpluses running these kind of schools. And these teachers are not even paid very highly, and that's one of the challenges we see, educationists see in India. They're not well trained. They're paid usually 2,500, 5,000 rupees a month, teachers. And you'd be very surprised to know that in government schools, teachers who join government schools, their starting salaries start at 25,000 rupees a month. Whereas in
Wow.
a private school, it starts from 500 rupees a month and goes up to 5,000 to 8,000 rupees a month in these affordable schools. These are also called affordable schools, these small schools.
And what would you say is the average kind of class size difference in a private school versus a government school? Just thinking of.
I think the class size is not very different. It depends really on a lot of other factors like how much space does a school have, what is considered as acceptable.
Hmm.
Government schools in India uh, can have as many as typically 50 to 60 children in a class, and
Mhm.
the problem gets further complicated when we have multi-grade classrooms where there's a small school where grade 1, 2, 3 together sit in one classroom itself. So then there are probably 100 children or 70 children or 80 children sitting in one classroom, and there are three grades in it. This is called a multi-grade classroom where the teacher teaches different levels,
Hmm.
different things to different groups within the same classroom. So this is one of the challenges that happens in government schools. In private schools, a lot of this is resolved uh, by teachers giving a lot of time and task to children. So they make sure that children do a lot of activities, do a lot of spend a lot of time learning, and therefore the range of these schools is something from 30 children to a teacher to about 50 children to a teacher.
Right. So comparatively slightly lower. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I'm cognizant of the fact we have just 3 minutes left, so we'll quickly run the last question by you, Parth. I'm just going to
Okay.
read it out. I haven't understood it completely myself yet. It states that the sentiment about the quality of education being better, is that a universal phenomenon, or do you think that learning outcomes from government schools like Delhi, which are now getting acclaim, have helped change the mindset? And I'm guessing this has helped change the mindset in India.
See, I think, can you read the first part of the question again? I'm just going to try to
Sure.
copy this out.
It states that the sentiment about quality of education being better is a universal phenomenon, question mark.
Mhm.
Or do you think that
Uh,
learning from government schools like Delhi, which are now getting claim, have helped change the mindset?
See, the reality is much more complex. See, I think a lot of parents who send their children to a government school send that child because they have no other option. They completely believe that they cannot spend on education, and that's why they're sending the child to a government school. So yes, for these parents, perspectives have changed. Like we've seen in Delhi, a lot of parents now actually believe that their children can get a good education in government schools. But this is also true in schools, let's say in Kerala, in Himachal Pradesh. A lot of people who send their children to government schools actually believe that government schools do provide learning outcomes which are not just at par but better than private schools. So private schools do not get that kind of a star value in states like Himachal Pradesh, Kerala, and now Delhi to some extent. But in reality, anybody who can pay still makes a very easy choice, because you cannot believe that all government schools can do this. Therefore, they make a very easy choice of saying, I can pay, therefore I will send my child to a private school.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. While you're speaking, Parth, we're getting kind of like multi-country perspectives on this, the different learning outcomes that is seen in countries beyond India. So in Australia,
Mhm.
one of our attendees is stating that the outcomes between government and private schools are actually the same. Another question that's come up is if you could quickly comment within a minute on the success of fellowship programs in schools.
Uh, so I'm trying to understand what people mean by fellowship programs. Are these where they're talking about things like Teach for India Fellowship or the Gandhi Fellowship? Uh, and maybe if they're speaking about these, there has been a difference because of certain fellowships launched by NGOs. Even there's a Prime Minister's Rural Fellowship, and I also know that Azim Premji Foundation also runs a fellowship. So these fellowships have definitely made a big difference, but that has it's still a very small percentage. You know, if you were to look at the number of teachers in India, and there are about 8 million teachers, fellowships don't even account for probably a few thousand, and it's been still challenging. And even though Teach for India is now 10 years old in India, they've struggled to do partnerships with various cities to be able to bring in teachers from through fellowships. But and there's been one other big challenge. Uh, a lot of the educationists have actually been very wary of fellowships, because you're basically taking a youngster who hasn't studied teacher education and you're putting them into schools. And my own verdict on this is that I actually support fellowships, because I think it's a great way. I've seen a lot of these fellowships eventually leading to these people continuing in education beyond their first fellowship. And I think that's a great thing, because that increases the more passionate people in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need more of them for sure.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So thank you everybody for tuning in and sharing your questions. The ones that were not addressed, we'll connect you to Parth and then have a deeper conversation. Um, thank you, Parth, for your time, for your insights. I think that was absolutely fascinating. And you're right, there are a lot of preconceived notions about school education more broadly in India, but you have just spent the last 50 minutes clarifying some doubts we all have, and also kind of updated us on what are the latest developments. I want to thank the audience for joining us today. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we will be sending across the recording of this webinar as well as Parth's slides. Please do look out for our next webinar under the knowledge sharing series. We aim to kind of host these each month, and each month we aim to put a member from the education team at Sanam S4 in the spotlight. Yes, take care and stay safe. Thank you.
Stay safe. Bye.